Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. My host, JP John Poz, with me today. A very special guest. You may know him from the Colossal Kongs, Krusher Kong, King Kong. He is Scott Thompson. Scott, welcome in. How you doing?
I'm doing great, John. How are you?
Very good. What's going on in your world? What are you up to?
Well, just after my wrestling career started winding down, I actually started working in movie theaters, and am now in the Northeast working for a movie theater chain, running locations all over the Northeast, and just enjoying life, living out in the country in Connecticut.
Love that. Anything wrestling related you've been doing? Or are you kind of staying out of that?
Not much. I still talk to a few guys, but I haven't been to a show in probably 3 years. Yeah, so yeah, I haven't been to a lot, and my communication with some of the boys is probably half a dozen guys I still talk to on a regular basis, and catch shows on television every now and then. You know, it is interesting to see some of the WWE stuff going on now and the AEW stuff going on now, and try to keep up with my roots, which are in Texas, with some people that are still running shows down there, and keeping tabs on some guys that are up and coming, guys and gals. But yeah, as far as direct involvement, yeah, not a lot.
Do you like any of the current wrestling that you're seeing, or is it too different than when you were wrestling?
No, I do. I like. I actually saw Jacob Fatu on a indie show in Texas several years ago, and he was already doing the whatever you want to call it, slingshot Samoan drop, where and the bounce to the top rope that he's doing now. Yep. Incredible athlete, and he is one of those guys that can do a lot of the new age stuff, the more acrobatic, athletic. I won't use acrobatic, more athletic stuff that's going on in the business now. But he can also bring a big dose of realism to what he does and how it looks. So guys like that, you know, I really enjoy watching, and some of the stuff in AEW is fun to watch, but it's tough. It is tough for me to watch stuff that looks like it's been rehearsed over and over and over and over again, and it's more of a dance than it is looking like a athletic competition. I mean, I know the fan base has changed, and there's a big audience for that, and there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, that stuff's not easy to do. It's not my taste as far as pro wrestling goes.
It is interesting, some of it, because you could tell how choreographed it is, and they went over it. It just, yeah, it can become more of a show than really anything else. I mean, I guess it is entertainment, but to me, I don't know, some of that stuff, it just looks so cheesy.
It can. I mean, you know, and towards the end of the time I spent in wrestling, it was getting, you know, a little bit more and more like that. And, you know, you'd be sitting in a dressing room and watch a couple of guys look like they did an hour and a half square dance in the dressing room prior to a 6 or 7 minute match. And what impresses me is the fact that they can remember, you know, so much of the stuff that they go over in the locker room. I mean, that is hard in and of itself. And then to go out and actually pull it off is really hard too. So I do have respect for those kind of things. Just watching it in a match is not super entertaining to me.
Now, recently, I know we talked about this off air yesterday. We talked about Black Bart recently passed away. Mentor of yours, had him on last year. Did another thing with him a while back. He's awesome, or was awesome. Just what a great guy. What a nice guy Black Bart was.
Yeah, super dude. I first met Black Bart when my partner and I started wrestling for the Global Wrestling Federation out of Dallas. And Bart was kind of a fixture there. And that really was a huge proving ground for a lot of guys. I think back on those times really fondly, and some of the guys that I wrestled with there are still people that I talk to. Rod Price I talk to fairly frequently. But yeah, Rick helped a lot of guys. That was really a special time, I think. And one of those like perfect mixes of groups where we had these grizzled veterans and guys like Bart and Mike Davis, Gary Hart, Skandar Akbar, Iceman King Parsons is another one that was a huge mentor of mine. I was an Iceman guy during those global times. Super guy. But you had those guys, and then you had, Stevie Ray and Booker T, who were just getting in. And you had JBL there just coming in, Alex Porteau, who was fairly fresh. A little later, Ahmed Johnson came in through the Sportatorium. You had, I know I'm going to miss people, and that's going to bother me, but you had Scott Putski there, whose lineage is, awesome in the business. And it just was a real blessing to me. And I had to look at it backwards, after the fact to understand the impact that time had on so many of us. I don't think a lot of the guys that made it out of the Texas area that made it onto the national stage would have done it without the experience that we were able to gather at our time in global. James Beard, another one that was a referee, tons of experience, helped a lot of guys. I look upon that time with a tremendous amount of fondness. Even though I didn't make a lot of money, but that I learned so much and so fast that what a great time.
And Bart, going back to Bart for a second, he just seemed like such a cool guy, such a nice guy, just an easygoing guy. I don't know, it just was great. So when I got the chance to interview him a couple times, he just was, just a blast.
Yeah. And what you see is what you get with Bart. He is not somebody who puts on a cowboy hat for the show. He will dadgum you to death in the dressing room. When you walked into the dressing room of the Sportatorium back then, I think the show started at 7 or 7:30. We'd come walking in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and Bart's already there in the corner in his gear with a trash can in front of him, big chaw of snuff in his mouth, and ready to rock and roll. And always had time before and after the match, to talk to guys about, what they were doing and how they were doing it. And it's something that I think there's a lot of guys out there that do that, pass it on to the next generation, but he really took that to heart and really helped guide a lot of folks in that time period. But yeah, what you see is what you get with Bart. The last time I spent time with him, I went out to his house in Tin Top, Texas, which is very rural. But he had a little plot of land right on the Brazos River, and he and I went fishing over there. A guy made his own bait. Just a real down to earth, salt of the earth kind of guy. And his language and how he talked and all of that it wasn't a gimmick. that was Bart. And just a special guy, really was.
Now, when you got started in the business, obviously Bart's now your trainer. That's a few years later when you start to meet him and learn some experience. So, when did you break in, and who was your trainer when you did break in?
I started summer of 1990. A friend of mine named Randy Blakely, who also works in the business under the name of Lance Romance. He had already trained and became a referee while I was away at college. And when I came back, he got me linked up with an independent show down in Texas, and I met a guy named Perry Jackson, wrestled as Action Jackson. He never got a ton of credit in the business and never got the break that he really deserved. I mean, he had a decent run in Puerto Rico against Savio Vega under the TNT gimmick back in the day. But he also Perry. When I first met Perry, it was really interesting. He and Undertaker were actually bouncers at a bar. The two of them were bouncers together at this little bar called Skippy's Mistake in Arlington, Texas. Two of them were good friends. If you watch Undertaker's Hall of Fame speech, he mentions Perry. Perry was actually there for the Hall of Fame speech. But the two of them really came into the business together. And but Perry, back then, there wasn't an abundance of wrestling schools. So what I had to do to get trained was I basically spent 6 nights a week driving Perry to his bookings. And then we get into the ring, for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, hour, whatever we had before he had to get ready for the show. And then I would just watch the show. But yeah, I mean, I was put in the ring too early. I was too green when I first had my first match. And my first match actually was on this little independent show. And it was at the time that Gary Hart was starting his I think it was called Metroplex Championship Wrestling. And Gary actually was at the show watching to see if there was any talent that he could use as either enhancement talent or on his show, period. And so my very first match was in front of Gary Hart. And that, I grew up watching him, living in the Dallas market. And it was pretty nerve-wracking. For having him as in the audience for the first match I ever had.
Man, I feel like so many people don't mention him enough, Gary Hart, just as far as great he was, great manager, great talker. I know everyone years later was saying how great his book is, and that was like a huge thing. And, obviously it became worth a ton of money because it was rare. But yeah, for some reason, not mentioned as much. Is because he wasn't up north enough? You know what I mean? Wasn't in WWF or whatever, maybe. I know WCW had a run, but it just feels like he doesn't get mentioned enough.
Yeah, he doesn't. I mean, he's one of those wrestling minds that you just, that you don't come across that often. And a lot of people don't know the history of Gary and how much influence he really had over the business. I mean, from his time when he was actually wrestling, in the Chicago territory. I've seen some matches from him from the old Marigold Arena from way back when. And then he ran the booking office out of Dallas. So he was basically controlling all of the talent for Fritz in the Dallas market and for Paul Bosch down in Houston. And, he basically controlled, and the Funks out in Amarillo. I mean, he was booking all of that and a tremendous amount of talent. And the influence he had over the business and in the various positions he had, I mean, he just had experience that very, very, very few people in the world of professional wrestling can ever come to the table with, and why he wasn't ever a agent or in the booking office for one of the major, I don't know. Gary is one of those people that will speak his mind, and not everybody likes that. But he's going to tell you what he sees, whether it's an easy thing to hear or not. But his delivery was great. He could tell me my match was the shits, and I walk away from it feeling like, he's complimenting me, and but that was just the easygoing way he had about him, Yep. He used to when he'd want to talk to me, and he had little names for lots of people, but he used to come over, Scotty, my boy, and I'd sit down and just listen to him. And get whatever nuggets I could get from him, and just incredible. I've been really lucky to have been up and down the road with somebody like Gary Hart, and later, Harley Race. I think the two of them are two of the best wrestling minds to have ever been part of the wrestling business. Yeah,
you got to definitely have some of the greats. As far as through your career, Gary Hart, obviously you're talking about Harley Race. Obviously, we'll get to him in a minute, but obviously Harley Race is another great one. So when you actually start, like, what's your first like big territory? Like, where do you kind of hit? Is it USWA or like where do you kind of like first kind of hit your big territories?
Yeah, I mean, Global had television, but they only did Friday nights television. It wasn't really a territory with any kind of active loop. My first break, and it was super short because the guy that I tag teamed at the time with, he and I just did not get along on the road. But my first big break was going out to USWA and working in Memphis under the tag team of the Fat Boys. Probably can't find much on us. There's only a few matches out there. Like I said, it did not last very long. But we went out to Memphis, did television, did a little bit. But yeah, the guy I was tag teaming, he and I just we couldn't do it on the road together. And you're not making enough money to take separate cars and all that kind of stuff. So that didn't last very long. But but I think somebody sent me a video that they found online of the Fat Boys making their debut on Memphis television.
Interesting name, right? I mean, that's kind of an interesting title there, the Fat Boys.
Yeah, I mean, this was the Fat Boys rap duo. Where were they at in 1990, 1991, whenever this was? This maybe even 1992. But we had colorful spandex on, and we actually wore do-rags to the ring. It was kind of interesting for look for two white guys. But
who comes up with that gimmick? Is that Jerry Jarrett or Jerry Lawler? I mean, who's coming up with that gimmick?
No, actually, Iceman did. We started tagging back in Dallas, and Iceman was running shows at the time. And we did shows for Iceman, King Parsons, and Killer Tim Brooks, both of which were running in the Dallas area together. But no, it was Iceman that came up with that.
So this is basically when Jerry Jarrett's going Texas to Tennessee, like that kind of connection there. That's basically the time period.
Yeah. I think he had just stopped running the Sportatorium when we went out to Memphis.
Is Steve Austin along the ride for you guys as well? Is he with you? Is he part of the crew at that point?
He was already gone when I got into the Sportatorium area. My partner Dwayne actually started his training under Chris Adams in the same class that Steve Austin was in. And so Dwayne knew Steve and worked with him. I didn't meet Steve until WCW when he was there, doing the Hollywood Blondes with Pillman at the same time that my partner and I were there. But yeah, he was already gone by the time I was working Sportatorium.
What did you think of Memphis just in general, that territory? Because everyone kind of at that point might be thinking that it's kind of headed towards to the end, but obviously Memphis during the 80s was hot. It was one of the greatest territories. So what did you think about Memphis?
I mean, I think a lot of what they did was really ahead of their time. I mean, the whole angle, and I know this was way before me, but the whole angle with Andy Kaufman and mixing wrestling with Hollywood and that kind of stuff was just really way ahead of its time. And they, it was a real gimmick heavy territory. I mean, people loved their gimmicks in Memphis and the run that Memphis did. So you had guys on top like the Moondogs were real big in Memphis, but they as good as they were, they never got the same kind of shine in a WCW or WWE arena. But those kind of gimmicks seem to flourish in the Memphis area. And so I thought it was a great place to start because honestly, the Fat Boys thing was a gimmick at the time that gimmicks were kind of starting their dwindle in the wrestling business, and then certainly the Kongs when they came around, we were on the tail end of the gimmick era where people would believe that, Kamala is actually from Uganda and,
Right.
that kind of thing. So, but yeah, I really enjoyed Memphis. I thought the crowds were really hot. They were really into it. But they definitely loved their gimmicks and loved, which was good for us as wrestlers because pay on some of those dates may not have been great, but gimmick sales were were
Right.
always good in Memphis. So
Right.
yeah, it was good. It was a good learning experience for me as well. Just being that was the first time that I had to be on the road for any period of time. I'd taken, bookings in neighboring states, but that was the first time that I was really what you would consider to be on the road wrestling.
Now, here's the confusing part. I think a lot of fans online even confuse you and Dwayne sometimes back then. So, were you ever in All Japan and different like Puerto Rico, or was that Dwayne? Because I always feel like people confuse you guys.
Yeah, no, neither one of us were ever in All Japan. I know there's I think there's
Somebody
something
with
on a
a similar name. Yeah, somebody with the same
yeah.
name.
Yeah, because the first gimmick I ever went by was called Big Hoss McAllister, and I think there's something out there where there was a Texas Terminator Hoss or something that wrestled in Japan that they attributed to me, but it wasn't me. Dwayne had a pretty good run in Puerto Rico, and actually that's when he came back from his run in Puerto Rico is when we started tagging, and it's another thing I can attribute to Iceman. Dwayne and I were both on Ice's show, and I had stopped tagging with my partner in the Fat Boys, and Dwayne had just gotten back from Puerto Rico. And in Puerto Rico, I guess there's not a real good translation for the word awesome. So down there, he was called King Kong and had all new gear made up with King Kong, and then came back. And it was kind of as simple as this. Iceman looked up at us at his show one night, and he said, "You two big." Is cussing okay on the show?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
He just looked at us and said, "You two big motherfuckers ought to tag."
Yeah.
And Dwayne had his Awesome Kong gear already on. He had his King Kong gear in his bag, handed me the King Kong gear. I put on the King Kong gear, and out we went. And that was our first time tagging together. So it was kind of, sometimes it's as simple as that. It's not a ton of thinking about it. It's not a ton of planning. It's just, here we go.
What a interesting, weird, wacky world wrestling could be. That it's just like, you two big guys, you guys should just team, and like, hey, I have the tights here. You know what I mean? It's just a happenstance. It's not even planned or well thought out at all.
Right. Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. And then once we started tagging, the only place that we were managed by Gary Hart was there was a group that was running shows down in the Texas in the Valley in Laredo, Harlingen, McAllen, and Gary managed us down there. And from there we had a short stint down in Mexico working for FILL was the name of the group, Federacional de Internacional de Lucha Libre, I think was, but they ran Monterrey and Torreon. So yeah, we were down there. Our first match down there was against actually John Bradshaw, tagged with Latin Lover.
Oh, wow.
That was our first match down in Mexico. I still remember that, and I also remember how hard that ring was.
What did you think about old JBL? John Hawk, I guess, at that point. But what do you think about John Bradshaw Layfield?
John, I really like John. I got along great with John. He's one of those guys. He's definitely old school in his mindset. Not somebody who is happy with guys who he feels are disrespectful to other guys in the business or the business in general. But he and I always got along really well. I do have an interesting story with John. A week before his first wedding, he and I had a match against each other at this little bar in East Dallas, and he had just gotten back from Japan. There was a bunch of guys in Texas going over to Japan for I can't remember if it was Noah or but it's the group that Kendo Nagasaki, the Dragon Master, was bringing over Americans to the group that he was booking over in Japan. But John had just gotten back from Japan, and he and I had a match together, and I picked up a glass, and I went to throw the drink in his face, and I actually hit him across the bridge of his nose with the glass, cut his nose, blacked one of his eyes. And like I said, this was a week before his first wedding.
Oh my God.
And so we got back in the ring, and he proceeded to kind of light me up with some real stiff kicks. I'm sure he gave and received similar over in Japan.
Yes.
I got the message that hey, lighten up, you stiff prick, or whatever his message was. But yeah, I felt bad about that for a long time. I'm sure his wedding was fine, but that was a interesting night.
Is that the reason you didn't get the invite to the wedding? Because
I don't know. I mean, John and I weren't super tight outside of the wrestling business, and I don't know if he kept his wedding small. But yeah, I didn't go to the wedding. I'm sure if I did, I probably would have gotten a stern talking to by the bride, probably more than John. Yeah.
I feel like you stiffed him. He's like, well, he's not going to the wedding. You know what I mean? Like he's out.
Yeah, take him off the list.
Yeah. Off the list. Yeah.
Yeah, but John wasn't known as being the lightest either. So
no.
you knew when you got because we had some matches down in the valley against John and Bobby Duncombe Jr.
Nice.
And
Yep.
Bobby made John look like he was light as a feather.
Wow. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. There was one time at the Sportatorium that John and Bobby tagged against Black Bart and John Mantell. Kind of like a old Cowboys against new Cowboys kind of angle. And I still remember I was watching the match, and Bobby locked up with Mantell, and Mantell took a bump on the lockup. It was so stiff.
Wow.
And, yeah. Yeah, sometimes there was one time Bobby just took, I think he was blowed up a little bit, but he just put his head down, and all you saw was these whirling fists coming at you with his head looking down to the canvas. It's like, holy shit, Bobby. At least look at me when you're punching me.
Wow, you're making JBL not look so stiff. I mean, you got to be like real stiff. Like, wow, that's crazy. Damn.
Yeah. El Cemento. That's what we call him in Texas.
Real? Oh, I like that. Cement, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
With obviously, we're talking about Global here. Bobby Duncombe, John Hawk. We're talking about Ebony Experience. You got Booker T and Stevie in Global. So, what was that like? The experience in Global? Because, like you said, you're gaining experience, but you're also on TV too. Because even in New Jersey, we got Global, we got ESPN. So, you guys are on television. So it's not like it's a small promotion. It's a pretty, maybe global, if I can use that expression there,
yeah.
Or at least a national promotion.
Yeah, and there was a lot of push because Pedicino had sold the promotion to an attorney in Arlington named Gray Pearson, and the TV deal was still intact. Sportatorium, was a great venue for television. Terrible venue for comfort, but great venue for television.
Heard, yeah.
And a lot of the guys that had been in the business for a while really pushed Gray to try to take what we were doing on the road, and it just never happened. The majority of the time after Gray took over, Skandar Akbar was the primary booker for Global. And, Akbar's got tons and tons of experience in the business and tons of experience with television. And, but for whatever reason, it just never expanded out into any kind of territory. But I think it absolutely could have. Like I said before, the mix of old school talent and young talent was so good there. I think if they would have branched out, they certainly could have had a successful run with spot shows and fundraising events at high schools and all kinds of stuff that was done in the territory days.
What did you think about Harlem Heat at that point? Do you have any experience, Booker T and Stevie Ray? Because I mean, you guys worked them a lot, had a little mini feud there. Obviously, they're super young to the business, become one of the greatest tag teams of all time. What do you think about them at that point?
Yeah, just super good guys, that's that to me. What kind of human being are you? So when people like that get success, I'm happy for them. Booker T. When you talk about guys in the business, I haven't been to one of his shows, Reality of Wrestling, down in Houston for a long time, but I lived in Houston for a few years back, 2006, I think, to 2010, and went to a couple of his shows. And the dude greets you as if you just saw each other last weekend and had a beer last weekend together. Just Booker T and Stevie Ray both are just really good guys. I was super happy. We all got our break with WCW at almost the exact same time, and almost for the exact same reason. The big thing that helped us get our dark matches with WCW and Harlem Heat both actually stemmed from Kerry Von Erich taking his own life. And they had a benefit show at the Sportatorium to raise money for his two kids. Lots of guys came in for it. Among those was Sid Vicious. And Sid actually is the one that put a word in and got Harlem Heat and us a dark match with WCW. So it, or at least that's my understanding. He was the only one on the show that was there. Sid had a voice in the office then, was one of their top guys. And, but Sid was there. That was a really interesting night. The main event had, Kevin Von Erich and Chris Adams tagging against, Michael Hayes. And, I can't remember if Terry, tagged with him with Buddy in the corner, or if it was, I don't remember exactly what the match was, but Fritz was in Kevin and Chris's corner, and that's the only time I'd ever met Fritz. But he was kind of in and out for the show. He wasn't like sitting in the dressing room cutting up with a bunch of guys. I don't think that's from what I've heard about Fritz. That's not really who he is. But that was the only show I ever did with Fritz. And the fact that these other guys came in is the reason why we got our dark matches up there.
Sid is to be thanked. Nice on Sid. But unfortunately, another guy passed away too soon. I mean, talking about Bart, obviously Sid, another one of those guys. But it's funny though with Sid, and I guess we can get to that in a second. But he would kind of cost you in a certain aspect with WCW as well. So those who give can take away as well, right? I mean, Sid kind of cost you guys as well.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, we had, and I think we talked about this briefly yesterday. During the time we were in WCW is when the infamous Arn Anderson Sid Vicious fight happened over on a European tour, and back then, we'd film 3 months of television at a time, and so before they went on tour, we had already done a big television taping in Atlanta at Peachtree, and part of those television tapings was us helping Vader put Sid down, and holding him down in one instance where Vader splashed him, and then attacking Sid in the ring at another instance at Harley's direction. And then when all of that happened, Sid lost his spot at WCW, and that match that was supposed to happen at Starrcade that year, which was Vader versus Sid, who tagged together. They were tagging together when we first got there, but they would have a split, and then their big wind up match would have been Starrcade '93, and that match ended up being Vader Flair after Vicious was let go, and Flair had come back into WCW. I think not long before we got there, he had come back from WWE, and it took him a little while to get back to his influence in office, but he definitely got back all the influence and probably then some of what he lost by leaving for WWE to begin with. I mean, Flair's another guy that just knows the business backwards and forwards.
Absolutely. Were you there when Sid and Arn Anderson had the scissor incident, or were you not on that tour?
We weren't on the European tour. That was the A tour. So all the biggest names in WCW were on that tour. My partner and I were actually on what they called the B tour, that started in eastern Kentucky and ran north up to Portsmouth, Ohio, and then looped back around through West Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and then looped back to Atlanta. So we were on a 21, 22-day loop in the States while they were over there.
When that happened, right, do you think anything of it? Like, oh, this is going to screw us, or do you guys just you're just going on your business? Like, wow, Sid's crazy. Can't believe that happened. And you just kind of move on.
Yeah. I mean, back then, I was, when I got my break in WCW, I was 23 years old and only had a couple of years in the business at the time. As far as cause and effect and what it might do to political outcomes and things like that, I was kind of oblivious to. We were booked on the show where the Shockmaster fell through the wall. I mean, that show was actually, our biggest match that we ever had there against Ric Flair and Sting was on the same show that Shockmaster fell through the wall. Well, in hindsight, and after hearing stories, after I, get a little more savvy to what backstage politics are, it kind of seems like that was one of the nails in the coffin, or whatever you want to call it, for Dusty losing some of his influence in the office, because the whole Shockmaster gimmick was Dusty's idea, and that kind of gave an opportunity for Rick to get some of his influence back and kind of move into a more primary spot. But back then I had no idea. I thought, shit, that was not good. But I'd never really thought about cause and effect. I just was too naive to that part of the business.
Pretty big spot for you guys, though, as far as the Flair Sting match, because obviously those are the two top guys, in WCW. So, what was that opportunity like at that Clash of the Champions?
It was really good, and this is part of, when I talk about kind of the power struggles in the back and the things that I was really naive to at the time. When we were first sat down by, I can't remember who was the agent that I think it was Mike Graham. It was Mike Graham or Greg Gagne, I believe, that first came to us and told us, the outline of the match and what they were looking for, and times in, times out, all of that kind of stuff. And originally it was supposed to be like a 7.5 minute match with some heat in on Sting, the traditional kind of hot tag to Flair. And certainly the outcome never changed. I mean, Flair and Sting were always going to beat us, no matter who was telling us what was about the match. But by the time we got to match time, it had been consolidated down to 3 minutes. We're not really getting much offense, and this is the story we're telling. And I think that was probably a power thing from Flair, probably Flair more than Sting, I would think. But just we were new in there, and if you're going to have those two powerhouses tag together, having a 8-minute back and forth with a team that's only been there for 5 months, I think to him didn't make sense, and so we ended up doing what we did.
Yeah, short match. I mean, you guys are huge, but it's funny because I guess 'cause they're such big stars, it's got to be a short match and it's got to kind of lead them in one direction. But yeah, it kind of hurts you guys a little bit though that it wasn't a longer match.
Yeah, yeah, and we caught a lot of grief from some people that are in the business after. My retort to that is, well, you will probably never get in the ring with Ric Flair and Sting and be announced by Michael Buffer. So
Right,
I'm not
right.
I'm not really that fazed by the hate coming from you. So I mean, yeah, there were some guys with when we came back to Texas, Gary. What Gary told us is that because we didn't know a lot about the backstage politics and stuff like that, what we needed was, and what we didn't have really was somebody voicing a protection of our gimmick and who we were to the office. We didn't have that. I mean, we had Harley managing us, but Harley got all his heat back in the main event when he cost British Bulldog his chance of the title. So whatever heat Harley got, Harley can get back with Vader.
Right.
But it definitely changed, I think, who we are or were, and kind of that invulnerability that we had going into that match was definitely sidetracked a little bit.
And then obviously you guys stay there, and you're still with Harley, but not as strong, if you will. So when you fast forward a little bit to Battle Bowl, and then they split up the teams. Obviously, that's the gimmick. You never know the lethal lottery. You never know what's going to happen. Did you like that though? Like, okay, I know it's the gimmick, but now we got to split up the team, and then we have to wrestle each other. I mean, it's kind of I don't know, a little hokey at times.
Yeah, it can be a little hokey. I liked. I mean, I guess what was fun. I mean, at least I knew this much. I saw what the matchups were. I was like, oh, I'm tagging with Dustin. I know I'm making it to the battle royal at the end.
Yeah.
Yep. And I saw I was tagging against my partner, and we did a little bit of that, teasing that we might actually fight, but not a lot in that. Equalizer, the other guy, Dave Sullivan, he was wrestling in Dallas too before he came to WCW, and he's really a super good guy too. I really liked Dave. So it's an interesting concept. I think there's a lot of things that can be done booking wise that could be really cool in that kind of concept. But the partner versus partner thing, especially when you've got gimmicks like we were, who kind of are clueless without our manager or our leader, that was kind of part of the gimmick. It makes it kind of tough because, who's directing what and who's telling who what. And, so I think there probably could have been a little bit more done with that if they really wanted to tease us together or fighting each other. But just the way it played out wasn't super exciting, I don't think.
Yeah. Of course, Vader ends up winning Battle Bowl. So, the big battle royal at the end, he's the champion at that point. He's like kind of the most dominant guy. To me, I don't know, maybe you would think otherwise, but one of the greatest big men of all time, right? Vader, or would you have another opinion on Big Man Vader?
No, I think Vader was an innovator. I mean, until then, and this was kind of harped in on me when I was coming up too, was, you don't do big moves. You don't do, you're big, your size is your gimmick. When you do things like moonsaults, it kind of eliminates the size as kind of part of that package. And, Vader showed that that's absolutely not true. You can be a big man. You can be acrobatic. You can still be a pounder, but that doesn't need to be all of who you are. So I think he was an innovator. I think he probably would have never evolved into who he is without that evolution happening in Japan. That time that he had over there. Because if you look at Baby Bull Leon White, versus what he became, it's just amazing, the transformation that he made from what he was, in AWA as Baby Bull into what he was as the champion, and one of the whether you believe in all the backstage, who fought who and who's actually tougher than who, the story like Vader fighting Orndorff in the back. There was nobody in the business more believable as a badass than Vader was at that time. I mean, nobody.
Orndorff thing, a whole nother story for another day. Obviously, I don't think people realize, supposedly one of the toughest guys like ever. I mean, even his old football team would talk about how tough he was, and he was a nut. And I was buddies with Kevin Sullivan. Kevin said he's like him and Haku are both like literally enraged. Like they would just go nuts, like and black out and just destroy people, and then they'd come back to earth. Like, so he's like, yeah, Orndorff and Haku, two guys you don't want to mess with.
Yeah, that's been the word, and I certainly didn't mess with either one of them. But Orndorff, Haku, I never really worked with, but Orndorff was in WCW for the entire time we were there, and always struck me as just as a super nice, level-headed guy. But the stories, and you do what you can to stay on his good side for sure.
Definitely. With obviously Battle Bowl happening, you guys split up. You ended up in the Battle Royal, and then really, if you look at it, you end up getting a one-on-one match at Starrcade too. So you fight Shockmaster at Starrcade. How does that work out? Like, how come Dwayne doesn't get how come you get the match?
Well, Dwayne, on one of our runs, he started having some issues with one of his knees, and so even on that run, because the entire run, it was supposed to be me and Dwayne versus Ron Simmons and Ice Train was the main event on that entire run. And we only did the tag matches half the time, and the other half we did me against Ron Simmons, just because Dwayne's knee was really bothering him. So when we got to Starrcade, the decision was made to just do the double teaming we did in the beginning, and then Dwayne slides out and I have the singles match. More so because he was just having some health issues than anything else.
Did you like having it being like such a short? I mean, it's Starrcade, it's great, it's all like the nostalgia of one of the biggest shows in WCW, but then it's only like a 2-minute match. It's a short match against Shockmaster, who a few months earlier kind of tripped and fall and kind of was, made a little bit of a joke there. So what did you think about it being such a short match again?
Yeah, I mean, I had some feelings at that time that we were being phased out. But it's still the biggest game in town. And so you do the best business that you can do, with the opportunities that you have. And, I certainly would have loved it to have been a more competitive match. Fred's another guy that he and I are friends on Facebook, although I think he's friends with everybody on Facebook. He's just a super, super nice guy and good human. But he's somebody else that I, occasionally go back and forth with on social media. And just he and his wife are both just really super, super good people. But yeah, I mean, after that, because we didn't have any bookings after the first of the year. We had already taped television that was going to play the next year, but we didn't have any booking sheets yet. And at Starrcade, one of the things that they told us, and was kind of, there's this is what's in it for you, I guess, for doing this 2-minute, job basically to Shockmaster. But we were told, new contracts and booking sheets were going to get mailed to us in Texas, and we'd have them by the end of the year. And Starrcade was the day after Christmas, so we're only talking about 5 days. And that should have rung a red alert in my head back then. If you're going to mail them to me, why don't you have them now?
Yes.
But like I said, 23, naive to the backstage stuff. I took them at their word, went home. Booking sheets never came, contracts never came, new bookings never came. I think our television that we had already taped did play the next year, but we never had another live booking with the WCW after Starrcade.
That stinks. And the way that happens too, like they're not very honest about it. They don't really kind of come forward and tell you what's going on. That just stinks.
Yeah, I mean, and it's you know, it's kind of I guess it's more of that old school thinking. You know, I mean, people if they're leaving the territory, or if they think they're leaving the territory, are they going to do business? Or are they going to go into business for themselves? So, you know, I don't know if they thought, you know, we wouldn't do whether they were asking us to do, or, you know, it's interesting, the evolution in the politics of the business, because, you know, back then a lot of it was based on territorial attitudes. Because guys, you know, that was how guys protected themselves, was they, you know, once their run ran out in Texas, they go to Portland. Once it runs out in Portland, they go to New York. Once it runs out in New York, they go to Florida. Once it became national, there wasn't that kind of economic protection for the boys anymore. And if you didn't have a contract with one of the majors, you weren't going to make it as far as making a living. And so I'd imagine there was fear that, you know, we would go into business for ourselves, or not give them the outcome that they wanted on live television, where you can't control it.
Right.
And that was part of what made them do that. I mean, yeah, it's not the way I would do business. And you know, I had some times where I did have to tell guys things about what I needed from them in a match that, you know, may or may not have been easy to hear. But you know, because I'd booked some shows in Texas late in my career. And, you know, there was one time that I had the main event on a show was a guy named Mike Fox, and he was taking on Rodney Mack. And Rodney had just gotten his deal with WWE, was going to be leaving to go work in WWE. He was a main event guy for us. And I had to ask Mac, you know, as he's leaving, you know, our gig, you know, I really would like you to put this guy over. And Rodney did business, and didn't, you know, that kind of thing doesn't affect you long term. I mean, people get wrapped up in wins and losses, but, you know, that kind of stuff doesn't affect you long term. You can come back from anything in the wrestling business. But it meant a lot to our local show. For, you know, 2 weeks later, the guy that the local show in Dallas beat is now on, you know, doing the White Boy Challenge on WWF. And but yeah, Rodney and his wife Jazz, also two of the best people I've ever met in the wrestling business. I mean, just God, they work so hard to get what they get. Jazz should be in the WWE Hall of Fame, in my opinion. She was the champion, women's champion, when WWF dropped the F and went to E. Really legitimized the women's division in WWE, I think. Took it from you know, kind of a tits and ass show to an actual wrestling show, and I think Jazz did that for them. And to me, she's one of the. I'm not going to say she's underrated, because I mean, she was the world champion. But if she doesn't get into the Hall of Fame at some time soon, then there's something wrong with the process, I think.
Yeah, it's insane. She's not in there already. And as we start to head towards the finish here, we head towards the wind down. So, like, you got from WCW, but still Dallas seems like it's such like a hotbed territory, because you got Global that happened there. But it's funny because World Class dies, and then, you know, Global starts, but then there's World Class 2, then there's CWA, then there's NWA Dallas with the Crockett's. So it feels like everyone is trying to like relive World Class, and obviously World Class 2 are really trying to relive World Class in that Dallas area. It just seems like wrestling is a hotbed there, but it just doesn't quite catch fire like World Class. I mean, they never could, just because I guess WWF is so big and WCW is kind of rolling.
Yeah, and it's always been because there's so many guys from Texas that had legit experience. It's always been really a hotbed for up and coming talent to cut their teeth and get rolling in the business. And even now, you see guys that are just rolling into the national stage. In guys like Sammy Guevara, Texas talent, Ricky Starks came from Texas, Keith Lee came from Texas, Lance Hoyt came from Texas. So you got a whole new batch, even now, of guys really making a name, and I'm probably slighting Lance Hoyt a little bit because he's been in the spotlight for several years now from his if you follow wrestling and know about his time tagging with Davey Boy's son over in Japan.
New Japan, yep.
Yeah. So if you really follow it, he's been in the spotlight for a while, but the Texas talent just kind of seems to keep producing. And why AWE isn't doing more with the mic skills that Ricky Starks has and the actual physical talent that Sammy Guevara has. That part I don't get. Both those guys. I mean, for me, if I could see a mic battle between Ricky Starks and MJF, I would watch that.
Yeah, they tried. They had that at one point, and they just kind of went away from it. And Starks actually kind of got the better of him a few times, which is great. But yeah, they kind of went away from him. And it's funny, he beat CM Punk. They had this big push for him, all this other stuff, and then they didn't do anything with him. It was really, really odd.
Yeah, I don't understand. I mean, it's really disjointed, the booking there. WWF is so much better at long-term storytelling. And I mean, they've got guys that have been in the business forever that are doing the booking. I don't even know who's booking AEW. I don't know if it's Tony Khan or if he's got a group that helps. I don't even know. I don't follow it enough to know that stuff. But yeah, I think they're really dropping the ball on some of this younger talent. To me, Ricky Starks and Sammy Guevara, and really, I mean, Keith Lee. Also, just the athleticism of somebody that size, that doesn't seem to be showcased enough either.
That's one of the things where I don't know what happened to him. I don't even know where he is. He hasn't been on TV in like a year. I have no idea what happened to him.
Yeah, I don't know. I should. Keith and I know each other, but I haven't seen him in probably 4 or 5 years. He was still doing mostly independent stuff the last time I saw him. But yeah, he's just I don't know. The wrestling industry or the wrestling history is just riddled with people that were either underutilized or underappreciated. That's for sure. It was, and that's the tough thing about the wrestling business and the politics side of it, and a big reason why I stopped was just it's so subjective. And, it's really cliquish when it comes to getting booked and getting slots and getting over and all those things. And I just got tired of trying to have to play that game to keep getting booked. And to be honest, like I said before, I mean, my partner and I came in on the very tail end of the gimmick period. And wrestling fans, I think, were tired of those kind of unbelievable kind of things. I mean, who are these two, fat white guys wearing a fur jacket, claiming they're from the unexplored confines of South Africa and can't speak English? I mean, is that really believable? So it all of that together kind of made my decision fairly easy to step aside, that and the toll it takes on your body. It takes a tremendous toll on your body to keep wrestling.
So anything coming up, anything wrestling? Are you still doing anything or no?
No, not at this point. There's a group that wrestles up here that I've heard some good things about, New England Wrestling, NEW. I think they're based somewhere out of Connecticut. I might try to catch one of their shows, but I'm sure I'll go incognito and just watch and enjoy.
So where can everybody find and follow you? Or you're not really doing social media? You're kind of off the grid.
I'm kind of off the grid. There is a guy in New York, kind of a friend of mine now, who started a Facebook page for the Colossal Kongs. There's a Colossal Kong tribute page. So if anybody's interested in seeing old pictures of us or stories, I follow the page. And anybody who has any questions, I'd be more than happy to engage with anybody who's got questions or wants to hear anything else. But as far as that's the only place. I'm old now. I'm not an Insta guy or Snapchat guy or anything. So that Facebook page there is about all that I follow. I have a personal Facebook page, but I don't really do a lot of wrestling stuff on the personal page.
All right. Krusher Kong, King Kong, thank you so much for all the time. Really appreciate it today.
Hey, thank you, John. Thank you, sir.